Welcome to Katie Couric Live, which we can't think of a better name. If you all have any ideas, hi, Jane Burns. If you all have any other ideas for a better title for our weekly Substack show, not easy to say, please tell me what you think. Thank you, Jane. I bought it in Paris when I was there with my daughters earlier this summer. And I have this Sailor's Valentine that I just bought here in Nantucket, which are really cool. Hi, Julia. Um, the sailors used to make these, I guess, on the ship, or I might be wrong. Maybe their wives made it. Anyway, I'm gonna find out more. Anyway, hi everyone. Julia, are you saying let's get going? Oh, okay. James is set to go on 3 minutes. So funny. I'm talking to my team. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. I'm technically out of office, but it really is hard to stay unplugged these days. So let me give you a quick rundown about what's happening. Here's a brief rundown of the stories we've been paying attention to at Katie Couric Media, KCM. I don't know if you all heard that 5 soldiers were shot at Fort Stewart. That is in Georgia. At least 2 of the injured have been transferred to the Memorial Health University Medical Center at Savannah, which is a level 1 trauma center. All are in stable condition and expected to recover, so that's good news. The suspect is a 28-year-old active duty soldier with no combat history. We don't know the motive as of now, but I wanted to note this is the 262nd mass shooting so far this year. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that Donald Trump intends to meet in person with Russian President Putin as soon as next week. He plans to follow up with another meeting with himself, Putin, and Ukrainian President Zelensky. According to the Times, Trump disclosed his plans on a call with European leaders this afternoon. This comes after Trump said his special envoy, Stephen Witkoff, made quote unquote great progress during a meeting with Putin in Moscow on Wednesday. And as a reminder, Trump has given Russia until Friday to end the war in Ukraine or face very severe tariffs and a new wave of sanctions. Also, this has happened, and it's a continuation of a story that many of you have been following. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has reportedly ordered a grand jury investigation into claims that Barack Obama or Obama administration officials fabricated intelligence about Russia's interference in the 2016 election. The move follows a referral from Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who recently declassified documents she says cast doubt on the Obama administration's conclusion that Russia tried to help Trump beat Hillary Clinton. Critics are calling it a dangerous political stunt, noting that past reviews, including those led by Republicans, I believe like Marco Rubio, found no wrongdoing. And finally, you know what? I'm going to skip this TechCrunch story. Oh, actually, I won't. TechCrunch, this is a crazy story, you all, reported today that several key sections of the U.S. Constitution appear to have been removed from the official government website. Significant portions of Article 1, Section 8 have been deleted. These sections address the powers that Congress does and does not have, as well as the limitation on the powers of individual states. Article 1, Section 9, and Article 1, Section 2 have been entirely removed and include sections related to habeas corpus, which, of course, protects citizens from unlawful detention. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has publicly suggested, as you all may recall, suspending habeas corpus to aid the president's anti-immigration agenda. It's unclear why these sections were removed from the official government website. The White House has not provided a statement about this, but several outlets are reporting that sources claim the deletions were the result of a technical glitch, and the Library of Congress posted on X that the deletion was the result of a coding error. Strange, though, right? Those are some of the stories we think you should know about. Meanwhile, let's get started on our live show. And our first guest is Texas Representative James Talarico. He's currently in Illinois after Texas House Democrats decided to leave the state in an effort to delay the passage of a controversial new congressional map. Last time we tried to do this, we had terrible technical difficulties, and let's hope it goes smoother this time. I'm a big fan of James Talerico, and I am very excited that he is joining us today. So let's see if we can do this, you all. Um, a lot of people objected. I think I said fled the state, and people were having were not happy with that word. So left the state in protest. I'm not quite sure, but let me make sure I have the right one. I think I do, Julia. It says waiting for James Talarico. Um, the Wi-Fi is not the best in this house. Sorry, you guys. So thanks for your patience. I'm just making sure that I did invite the right. Yep, it is the right James. And we even did a tech check, you guys, before this. So hopefully James will come through loud and clear. Fingers crossed. Oh, Julia said he's coming. Julia Lewis and the news is my producer who works on this show. And his team, she's writing me a note on my notes. Okay. Stand by, everyone. Everyone else, tell me what you're up to. Are you having a nice summer? It's kind of a weird summer, isn't it? The news never stops. He said they're joining. This is, you're seeing how the sausage is made, everyone. But it'll be really interesting to hear what the plan is. This is a wild story about redrawing the congressional map. Hi, James.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm very excited because you're as clear as a bell.
Oh, good.
I hear you, and hopefully everybody watching can as well. Thank you, James, so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And Julie, um, so I know you're in Illinois right now. Tell us the lay of the land, why you're here, and kind of, I think most people who are interested in politics obviously have been following this story uh, closely. Sorry, my audio went out, but now it's okay. I understand. Tell us about why you're in Illinois and sort of what's happening with Texas state Democrats at this point.
Yeah, I think everybody's hearing these terms: redistricting, gerrymandering, quorum. This is some political jargon. Katie, as you know, I was a middle school teacher, so I can at least try to explain in basic terms what we're talking about. Um,
What in middle school?
Sorry, Katie, you're cutting out a little bit. Did you ask what grade in middle school?
What taught in middle?
Yeah, I taught sixth grade language arts at Rhodes Middle School on the west side of San Antonio. Which, if we've got anybody watching from San Antonio, they know that the west side is this beautiful, historic Mexican American neighborhood, and it's also one of the poorest zip codes in the state of Texas. So, I saw kind of firsthand what needs to change in our education system, and it's why I ran for office. And I often joke that teaching middle school is the best preparation for politics, but it's actually kind of the truth because you really learn skills as a teacher. How to boil things down that are complicated into easily understandable pieces of information, which is what I try to do, on social media when I'm explaining all this complex stuff. You also learn as a teacher how to bring a bunch of different people together. In my case, it was 150 12-year-olds who were forced to be there by law and didn't want to be there, brought them together to do something really big, which in our case was growing our reading level by two grade levels. Anyway, but so as the middle, let me put my teacher hat on. So typically, state legislators like me and my Republican colleagues in Texas, we adjust district boundaries, districts for the state legislature, districts for congressional races. We adjust those boundaries at the beginning of every decade to account for population changes after we get a new census. That is what's supposed to happen. It's normal, it's appropriate, it's good. Because if you have a bunch of population changing, like obviously Texas is a fast growing state, you want to make sure that everyone has roughly equal representation. So you don't want a ton of people in one district and fewer people in another. So you've got to adjust those district boundaries. Obviously, the problem comes when in states like Texas, the politicians draw their own lines. And they do it usually to protect themselves and protect their party. That's called gerrymandering. And it happens in red states and in blue states. It's a problem in both political parties. I would say in our modern era, it's happening more in red states. You saw national Democrats last time they had the majority vote to ban gerrymandering across the country in the For the People Act. So I don't want to both sides of this, but I do want to acknowledge that gerrymandering is a problem in red and blue states alike. And it's wrong in both instances because it's essentially the politicians choosing their voters instead of the voters choosing their politicians. But what's happening here in Texas is at a whole nother level. So the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the country, is requesting that those Texas Republicans that drew the maps back in 2021, those maps were gerrymandered, but I and my Democratic colleagues didn't break quorum. We spoke against those maps. We voted against those maps. The reason we're breaking quorum is that Donald Trump has requested they redraw those maps in the middle of the decade. Again, this is like changing the rules after halftime of a football game because the team that's ahead wants to stay ahead. If that happened, we would all be throwing food at the TV screen, right? Because it's cheating. And that's what this is. It is cheating. And so if they're going to cheat, we're not going to play. And the last thing I'll say is that the reason I think the president is doing this is because he is worried he's going to lose his majority in Congress in the midterm elections next year because his policies are unpopular, right? Kicking millions of people off their health care to fund tax breaks for billionaires. That's not popular among Democrats, independents, or Republicans. And so what's at stake here is can the people check the most powerful politician in the country? Will we be able to elect a Congress that can hold the president accountable? And that's fundamental to this American experiment. So we are not fighting for the Democratic Party here. We are fighting for the democratic process.
James, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So what is the plan? I know that you've said that Texas Democrats are committed to staying out of state until the end of the special legislative session, which is in 2 weeks. Is that still the plan?
That is still the plan. That's the commitment we've all made to each other. Now, we could stay out of the state longer. Obviously, we're trying to take this one special session at a time. If you try to entertain all the hypotheticals, you can drive yourself crazy. And so, once this special session ends and we kill this map, then we will come back to Texas. If another special session is called, we'll evaluate our options. The governor of our state has the ability in our Constitution to call a special legislative session. He's the only one who can do it. But the Constitution says it should only be for emergencies. I don't think protecting Donald Trump's power is an emergency. What is an emergency is preventing the flooding that we saw in the Texas Hill Country over the 4th of July weekend. That is an emergency that we should be coming together to solve. Unfortunately, Greg Abbott, our governor, has used those flood victims and their families as leverage because basically he sets the agenda and he put the flood relief and flood mitigation behind this redistricting scheme, behind this power grab. And so now he's on TV saying, the Democrats left and they don't want to help flood victims. And that maybe people who don't know any better will believe that. But anyone who understands how this process works knows that he's actually the one who's exploiting those victims to do Donald Trump's bidding.
And James, you can explain as a middle school teacher this
Yeah.
redrawing of these districts.
Right.
There are five new additional congressional districts that are drawn in such a way that they heavily favor whoever the Republican would be who is running in those districts, correct?
Yes, and it's a little misleading because we've all been saying, and I've said this too, that they're creating 5 new seats. It kind of sounds like they're creating seats on top of what we have, but to create new seats, you have to break apart old seats. And and really the way they do this is by going after communities of color, Black and brown communities in Texas, which are growing at a rapid rate. And so if you look at these maps, they are diluting the voting power of communities of color. Now, Black and brown communities don't always vote for Democrats. And Donald Trump himself actually made progress in those communities on his merits in the last election. And that's a good thing. We should all be contesting every vote. We should all be competing for every vote. But what they're doing here is they are intentionally dividing those communities so that they have less power, so that they're not able to pick the candidates of their choice. And so that's the strategy. And this mid-decade redistricting, it's particularly brazen, it's particularly egregious, particularly discriminatory, and it is all at the direct request of the most powerful man in the country. That's why this is all so different than the typical gerrymandering we see.
And James, it's not, as you said, they aren't new seats. They're seats that were being contested and potentially won by Democrats, but the area has been redrawn. So those who would potentially or more likely to vote Democratic are taken out of those districts and put in other districts. So the Republican candidate is more favored to win.
Correct. And so let me just give you an example of this. I represent Central Texas. Remember, Texas is a big state. I represent parts of the areas around Austin, the state capital. This map would take some of our Central Texans, draw them into a district that goes all the way to the Texas coast. And again, maybe it'd be helpful for people to pull up a map, but that is about 4 hours away from the city of Austin. And we love people on the coast, but these are two different communities that have very different needs, very different problems. And so the idea that one member of Congress could represent both communities that are so far apart, so different, is just insane. I mean, you look at this map and it's complete absurdity. And that's because the goal is not to create fair representation for all communities. The goal is to hang on to power. This is not about party. It is about power. People who have power want to hold on to it, and they're going to do whatever they can to rig the rules and stay in power. And that's a threat to all of us, whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or Republican, or honestly, Katie, whether you're an elected official or a journalist, because these tactics, they may be coming after Texas Democrats right now, but you know more than I do. In other countries, they end up coming for all of us when these tactics continue.
I guess the question I wanted to know, you acknowledge that this has been done by Democrats, more recently, primarily by Republicans. But have Democrats ever taken an opportunity, sort of census, you know, before a new census comes out every decade? And that's generally when congressional districts are redrawn or gerrymandered. Have Democrats ever done this before, certainly at the behest of a sitting president?
I'm not familiar with an instance of Democrats doing it. They may have, and someone can feel free to check me in the comments. The only other instance I'm familiar with is when it happened in Texas. This is so rare. I think it's helpful for people to know how rare mid-decade redistricting is. But it did happen in our state in the early 2000s. I was in middle school at the time, but I remember because Texas Democrats broke quorum and went to Ardmore, Oklahoma, to try to stop that process from happening. And so it's such a dangerous precedent that we almost have to take these extreme measures, because if we just let it, go on and run its course, and we do our typical thing of giving speeches against it on the House floor, it really allows the party that's in power to do this over and over again.
What happened in the early 2000s when you were in middle school, James?
Well, sadly, those Texas Democrats weren't able to hold out, and those maps passed. Tom DeLay, if you remember, Katie, ended up going to jail. He was the kind of the ringleader of that whole operation. So there it was corrupt top to bottom. And the reason this is so important, again, I know gerrymandering, it all sounds like inside baseball, and maybe political nerds are interested in it, but for regular people, this is the rot at the core of our broken political system. It is what prevents us from making progress on housing, on healthcare, on education, all the things that we all care about. This is what prevents that, because it is, again, insulating politicians from the will of the people, from the will of the public. I mean, that's the only way you can change your government, right? Is you elect new people. And you can't do that if the game is rigged. And one more point I'll make is gerrymandering is what leads to extreme politics. A lot of my constituents, they'll be like, why are y'all at the state capitol always talking about gay people and, culture wars and bathrooms? And why aren't you talking about the things that we all care about, property taxes and healthcare insurance, right? And I always tell them it is gerrymandering, because if you have a deep red district or a deep blue district, the general election outcome is kind of predetermined. right? There's really no chance a Democrat can win in a district that Donald Trump won by 80%. That is that's political physics. That's really hard to break out of. And so when the general election is predetermined and you don't have any threat in your general election, then where is the threat? It's in the primary. And that means that the only thing you've got to be worried about as a politician who's trying to win re-election is your most extreme flank, right? Because that's where the competition is. It's in your primary, not the general. You're not worried about the general. And that means that Republicans have to appeal to the furthest right flank of their base. Democrats have to appeal to the furthest left flank of their base. And that's why you see, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world pop up. It's because this system incentivizes that kind of extremism. You can get rid of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and there's going to be someone who takes her place who's equally extreme because the system itself incentivizes it.
Jessica Fillion, who's watching, said ranked choice voting would also help. Do you agree with that, James?
I do. I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting. I'm also a fan of more political parties. This may be a hot take, but I think our two-party system is really toxic and leads to a lot of this polarization. In other countries, you have a lot of political parties. In a parliamentary system, they join in coalition to be able to hold on to power, and I think that's really healthy because it allows for more perspectives and different coalitions to form and work together. It incentivizes collaboration more than polarization, at least in my opinion.
Let me ask you, get down to brass tacks on some of the
Yes.
logistics, James, of what's
Yeah.
happening
Sure.
in the here and now. Although that was extremely helpful, at least 50 of your colleagues, as you know, have left Texas and dispersed across the country to prevent the House chamber from having a quorum. So let me tell you what has happened. I mean, but for everyone watching, on Tuesday, Greg Abbott, the governor, asked the Texas Supreme Court to remove Houston Representative Gene Wu, chair of the House Democratic Caucus, from office. Texas Senator John Cornyn asked the FBI to help state law enforcement locate and arrest Democratic lawmakers who had left the state. And Attorney General Ken Paxton said he will ask for a court ruling declaring vacant the seats of any lawmakers who are not back to work by Friday. I'd love to hear your reaction to all of that.
Well, they're at least consistent. The goal of these rigged maps is to prevent the people of Texas and ultimately the American people from electing the candidates of their choice. And now they are literally threatening to remove the people's representatives. I was duly elected in a free and fair election to represent my community in the state house. I am their fighter. And he is trying to remove me and my colleagues. He's, as you mentioned, starting out with our caucus chairman, Gene Wu, who was also duly elected by the people of Houston. And so by trying to remove those public officials, my Republican colleagues and Governor Abbott are walking down a very dangerous path. I mean, we are in banana republic territory now. And this is something you read about in other countries, and I never thought we would read about it here. Again, breaking quorum is constitutionally protected in Texas. It is a tool in our Texas Constitution that the minority has to check the majority's overreach. And the majority, again, is overreaching with this mid-decade power grab. Katie, I fight on the House floor against policies I disagree with all the time, of a voucher bill that is defunding public schools, the most extreme abortion ban in the country that is literally endangering women and girls across the state of Texas, the refusal to expand Medicaid, which is closing rural hospitals. These are things I am so passionate about, but I don't break quorum because the Republicans have won statewide elections in Texas for 30 years. They have a right to govern. I love democracy even when I lose. But this is different. The reason I fight and don't break quorum is because my party always has a chance to win the next election, right? Like in football, there's always next season. That's not going to be true anymore if we allow a power grab like this to go through.
Will you just tell people in simple terms, James, what exactly it means to break quorum?
Yes, that's a great question. So a quorum is a certain number of members that have to be on the floor of the Texas House to conduct business. And you probably, people are familiar with a quorum from like PTA meetings or city council meetings, and it's true in the Texas legislature. And Democrats are such a big minority. A lot of folks outside of Texas think that we are some deep red state, And that's actually not true. We're much more like a pink state. Our elections are statewide are decided by single digits nowadays. Democrats and Republicans are within single digits of each other, and we
60%, James, 60% are minority residents and 40% are white residents, correct?
That's right. And so we as Democrats, we have about 42% of the seats in the Texas House. And so we're a large chunk of the votes. And it means that if they want to conduct business, they need our consent. They need us on the House floor. And we give that consent always. We are there all the time. Again, when they are passing bills that we find morally reprehensible, bills that are endangering the lives of our constituents, we still show up because this is a democracy and they have a right to govern as the majority. But again, this is fundamentally different because they're trying to rig the next election and prevent competition in Texas. And that's why we were taking this step to check their overreach.
Well, do you worry that they're going to follow through on their threats? I mean, you hear about, Democrats getting arrested or vacating the seats that you all have won and been elected to. I mean, what safeguards are in place to prevent them from doing that?
I mean, the constitutional answer is the courts. But as you know, Katie, I mean, the courts have increasingly become politicized, increasingly bought by big money. In Texas, our Supreme Court is elected. So it's all Republican politicians who are on the highest court in our state. And so I'm worried that I don't think there is a legal basis to do this. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a former teacher, but I have a lot of smart lawyers in the Democratic caucus here with me. And all of them has said that there's really no legal basis to do this. But my concern is that politics will rule the day and not the law. So I do think this is a real threat. And again, it's something we should all reject because they may come for Democrats now, but they come for all of us eventually.
Yeah, and I know that you think the media and that various politicians all over the country or just average citizens are not taking this seriously enough. And now we're hearing, obviously, from Democratic governors like J.B. Pritzker, where you are in Illinois, Gavin Newsom in California, Kathy Hochul in New York State, all saying, hey, if they do, Alyssa Slotkin, I think, also joined that chorus saying, if they're going to do this, we're going to redistrict the hell out of our states. We're going to fight fire with fire. It sounds like you have a real moral sense that this is not right. This is cheating. Is that your only option, fighting fire with fire? And, if someone's cheating, cheat yourself?
Well, Katie, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with water. I think we all know that in our everyday lives. But
Touche.
but but and this is an important caveat. You don't fight fire with a dripping faucet. You fight it with a fire hose. And so it's really important that my party maintains its vision for how we fix this democracy. And that is getting gerrymandering out of every state, getting the politics out of redistricting. That's the only way out of this situation. But if one side cheats, then there has to be a response. I think all of us remember seeing bullies on the playground picking on kids that are a lot smaller or weaker. And the only way to beat those bullies is to look them in the eye, right, and not to flinch, because bullies are a lot weaker than they appear. And I think that's true in politics too. My hope, my prayer is that these threats of retaliation from blue states, and maybe even some of these blue states moving forward with retaliation, can speak to my Republican colleagues back in Texas and maybe even speak to Donald Trump and convince them to walk back from the brink. Not necessarily because they think it's the right thing to do. I'm not holding out for a profile in courage, but they may think that it's not strategic because honestly, the gains they could make with this power grab in Texas could be wiped out with a power grab in California. It does not make that power grab in California morally right. I want to make sure that it's very clear because it's easy when you stand up to a bully to become a bully yourself. And so this is a fine line to walk. It's a thorny, strategic, and ethical question. But I do believe that Democrats cannot unilaterally disarm.
He, I know, sorry, I saw your internet was unstable. I
Yeah, I
think
saw that too.
it's fine. But, Donald Trump hasn't said a lot about this, but he said on CNBC yesterday that Republicans were entitled to more seats in Texas. What was your response to that?
I mean, as so often happens, Donald Trump just says exactly what's happening out loud, and sometimes that's helpful for him just to give the game away. None of us are entitled to these seats. No politician is entitled to these seats. These seats belong to the people, and that is just a fundamental misunderstanding of how America works. To think that the most powerful man in the country is entitled to congressional seats, this is the problem. This is exactly what's motivating this power grab. And so I hope that we can all stand up against this. Again, this should not be a partisan thing. If this becomes a red versus blue fight, we are doomed. This has to be something that we all, as Americans, stand together and say no president should ever try to escape accountability or escape consequences for their actions. If we do that, it's going to get real dangerous real fast.
Yeah, and I know you have to go and I have to go too. My team is saying you got to wrap it up, Katie. But I just wanted to ask you, I mean, if Governor Abbott, okay, so the special session ends, right, James?
Yeah.
And then he just calls another special session.
Yeah.
Is there really and is there no recourse from any kind of judiciary or any kind of court response to this? I guess it just sounds like I know a lot of people think it's kind of a futile effort what you all are doing, that it's getting a lot of attention and they admire your principles, but ultimately it's just going to fail.
Well, I broke quorum in 2021 with my Democratic colleagues over a voter suppression bill. It wasn't redistricting, but it was, again, a direct attack on democracy. It was an attempt to cheat. And so we broke quorum. And that bill eventually did pass because we couldn't hold out forever. But what I will say is that by shining a national spotlight, an international spotlight on that voter suppression bill, we pressured our Republican colleagues to take the worst parts out. A ban on souls to the polls, which is Sunday morning voting, which African American churches have utilized historically. They took that out. There was a provision that would have allowed them to overturn election results they didn't like. They took that out. So that bill became materially less harmful because of our quorum break. Courage is contagious. I firmly believe that. And by taking this stand, I hope at least people are waking up to what's happening. I've heard that gerrymandering is being searched, more than anything else, right? I mean, this is I
A
think people are
teachable moment.
exactly. And it's so important because Katie, you know this better than anybody. When I was growing up, like everybody in our community, Republicans and Democrats, when Katie Couric reported the news, they listened and they trusted you, and we were all operating with the same set of facts. We're not in that era anymore, unfortunately. And so it's going to take acts of courage like this to shake the conscience of this country and hopefully get us back to some kind of common purpose, which I think we've been missing over the last decade, to say the least.
Well, James Talarico, it's a real pleasure to have you help us understand what's going on. I know you're in divinity school, but I sure hope you stay in politics because quite frankly, we need people like you who can help people understand these complex situations, who is a principled person with integrity. And I hope you consider, I know it must be not very much fun a lot of the time, but it's so important to have admirable people like you serving our country and being in public service. So thank you for what you're doing, and I can't thank you enough for making time in your schedule to join us. And please keep us posted as this story continues to develop.
Well, thank you for those words of encouragement. It means so much coming from you. You've been a hero of mine for a long time. And so I really appreciate it.
Thanks, James. Okay, appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
See you soon. Bye bye.
Okay, bye. Okay, now we are going to my next guest, who is Sarah Fitzpatrick. Sarah is going to catch us up to date, everybody, on what's going on with the latest in the Epstein story, which has kind of gone off a bit of the front pages because here she is. Nope, no, that's not her. Here she is. Okay, let's see if this works. Sorry, I went a little long with James, but isn't he impressive, you guys? Tell me what you think of him. I find him so well spoken and so clear. And there's Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Katie.
So nice to meet you. I should explain who you are, Sarah, and maybe you can lower your headroom just a teeny, teeny bit.
Absolutely. One
So
second.
Sarah is a journalist. She has been following the Epstein story for years. Virginia Giuffre was a longtime source of Sarah's, and Sarah was actually the only journalist who was invited to attend Virginia's funeral. I want to talk to you about that because so heartbreaking what happened to Virginia. Sarah is the person who wrote a piece for The Atlantic about Virginia's family's reaction to some of Donald Trump's recent comments. So, we're going to be talking about that along with the latest on the House Oversight Committee's subpoenas and Ghislaine Maxwell's transfer to a lower security prison. So, Sarah, so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this. And I wanted to start by asking you about the piece you wrote for The Atlantic last week. It was about Virginia's family's reaction to Donald Trump's kind of casual comment that she had been stolen by Jeffrey Epstein. What did they say to you, and what are the broader implications of those comments or President Trump's comments?
Yeah, I think the Giuffre family felt what can only be described as shock and kind of reeling when they heard the president mention their really beloved sister who just recently passed away, as being stolen, as just kind of in a very offhand and dismissive manner. And they were both concerned and kind of bewildered, I think I would describe it. And they talked to me a lot about wanting to not be seen as partisan, not be seen as, they want the truth. They want as much information as they can possibly learn. And so I think there was a real kind of concern about how to respond, what would be the best way to respond, but ultimately they felt that, what Virginia wanted was transparency. And the president's comments to them were very striking because it suggested that he did have some kind of knowledge of the fact that she had been recruited by Epstein and Maxwell. And then later, the president made comments suggesting that there was another individual who had been, quote unquote, stolen from him. And so I think their statement was designed in hopes for, you know, Mr. President, if you have any information that might be pertinent, please share it with us.
Well,
Um,
can you
and, I
share?
think they're reeling. They're very much still reeling from the fallout of that and kind of the recent developments this week.
Well, and I'm sure they're still grief stricken because Virginia took her own life in April of this year, which was so heartbreaking. And I want to talk to you about that before this conversation is through. But getting back to the president's comments, because I think for people who aren't following this every day, tell us what he said and kind of what implications that had for the larger conversation.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's really important about this is that the president I've been reporting on Epstein now for over 7 years. And Virginia Giuffre has been long known to have been recruited by Epstein's closest kind of associate, often described by the government as a co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, and that she recruited Virginia Giuffre when she was a 16-year-old spa attendant working at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago spa as a summer job. Ghislaine went in, met Virginia, and I believe it's within days, Virginia was first sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, as she is alleged in court filings as well as public statements. So what's interesting about this, though, is that the president has always, one, not really engaged publicly about that topic in particular. And I've done a lot of reporting, have had lots of back and forth with his staff, with the White House, et cetera. They have always been vague or conflicting information, but never wanted to really address this key point specifically. And so this is the first time that the sitting president acknowledged that he had awareness of this criminal activity that was happening on his property, and the fact that he shared some new information, which was that Virginia was the first, and that there was a second employee that Epstein had, quote unquote, stolen away from Mar-a-Lago, and that was the cause of the president and Jeffrey Epstein's close friendship, which then at some point had a break, although we've gotten lots of conflicting information about exactly why that is. And so it was just stunning for everyone, I think, involved, including the reporters on Air Force One, who were really, I think, quite shocked by it, that the president might have information that was material to this case that is suddenly being shared now. I think is just a fascinating admission, and kind of we wonder, why haven't we heard this before?
Yeah, and why would he talk about this now, Sarah? I mean, the fact that there's so much focus on this. I just think it's really strange that he, uh, you know, that he decides to make a comment about this now and bring attention back to these Epstein files, which he's very much trying to, you know, distract attention from.
Absolutely. And it's
Uh,
also, remember, this is the second time that President Trump has had his presidency impacted by the association with Epstein. Remember that his Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta, ended up having to step down as a result of public scrutiny on his role in the Epstein plea deal. And so it's interesting. President Trump could have made those comments years ago, but instead he's making them this week or last week.
Yesterday, the Republican run House Oversight Committee, as you know, because you cover this every day, Sarah, subpoenaed the Department of Justice, calling for all documents and communications relating or referring to Epstein and Maxwell, including information contained in their respective court cases, by August 19th. So this is obviously going to stay in the headlines. And I believe three Republicans broke ranks, I think, and voted with Democrats to subpoena the Department of Justice, right, Adriana? Adriana, who helped me with the research on this. So, what have you been hearing from your sources about this? What does it mean? And do you think the DOJ will cooperate?
I think this is a fascinating wrinkle in all of this, because you have this controversy that is not just contained to the White House, and it's not just contained to DOJ, and now it's in Congress, which means it is much more unpredictable, and I think will only lead to and fuel additional things. So I spoke with some sources at the Oversight Committee who said that they made the point that I thought was interesting, which is that the chairman was compelled to issue these subpoenas this week because of a lower subcommittee vote, but it was a bipartisan vote. And I think that speaks to the fact that, this is rare, especially the House Oversight Committee right now is a extremely contentious, very political, it is almost impossible to get anything done in that committee because of the combination of characters involved and their respective interests. And so the fact that you have a bipartisan group asking for these subpoenas, I think, speaks to the fact that there are so many unanswered questions, and that it goes beyond party lines, that the public, like, there's a real acknowledgement that the public has pushed this issue to the forefront, and they're expecting their elected representatives to back up these statements of transparency. And one of the ways that you can do that is through subpoenas and requests for documents.
They also issued subpoenas to 10 former government officials, including Bill and Hillary Clinton, former FBI directors James Comey and Robert Mueller, and former attorneys general Merrick Garland and Bill Barr. So, what can you tell us about these additional subpoenas?
So there are 10 subpoenas, and they are primarily, I think there's kind of two tracks to this. One is elected officials that were in positions of power within DOJ to have had some insight into this case and how it has evolved. That makes some sense. You also see people like Bill Clinton, who are very, very prominent Democrats, that I think the right and the Trump administration, and even Donald Trump himself, has at times pushed this story because of a belief that perhaps other prominent Democrats um, would have been involved, because Jeffrey Epstein socialized with a wide range of people on both sides of the aisle. And so I think that those subpoenas are in some ways an attempt to gain facts where there have been very little information provided thus far. Um, And, it is partisan in some ways, why some of those people were trained. What I do think is really interesting is I was discussing with a source today that Alex Acosta, the former Trump labor secretary who was involved in the Florida case when Jeffrey Epstein was first arrested and negotiated a very, very controversial plea deal. Alex Acosta was the person involved in that, and he has come under tremendous scrutiny for the choices that were made. A DOJ review found that people exercised poor judgment, but not professional misconduct. And so, interestingly, he is not subpoenaed, but his boss, Alberto Gonzalez, is. And I think that, why that's the case, I'm told, is because Gonzalez would have had oversight over Acosta's work. But I think it's interesting that one and not the other has been subpoenaed.
Interesting. That is interesting. And by the way, the 3 Republicans who voted voted in favor of these subpoenas were House Republicans Brian Jack of Georgia, Nancy Mace of South Carolina, which I think her breaking and kind of being a thorn in Donald Trump's side has surprised some people, and Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. And it included language intended to protect the identities of the victims. I'm curious, you've been reporting on this for so long, Sarah. How many victims are there?
Katie, the answer is at least over 1,000 that the U.S. government is aware of and has documented in the course of their investigations. My reporting suggests that it may be even beyond that. Now, because Epstein traveled across the world, he had multiple homes in multiple jurisdictions. And I think, he was so, sometimes even Virginia herself would say he was sexually assaulting maybe 3 or 4 different women a day. So the universe is huge. And these women, I think what's really important to understand is that these women are not women of means. They are not prominent people. Epstein and Maxwell very specifically had targeted women that would not have the means to defend themselves, that would not be believed, they believed that would not be believed by law enforcement if one of these victims were to go to law enforcement. And so these women, I think it's really important to remember that these are real people who have gone through unbelievable trauma, who have tried to put this story behind them and live with the ramifications, physical ramifications of their sexual abuse, psychological, drug and alcohol issues that have been very prominent among this group of victims as a result of this trauma. And so, these are real people whose lives are kind of hanging in the balance here because they feel, many of them have confided in me, that their worst experience of their life is being used as political warfare or being used as a pawn. And I think sometimes that really gets forgotten in this conversation.
I think you're so right. And I'm so glad you brought that up. There's been reports that I've seen, Sarah, of someone named Katie Johnson who has, I guess it was in a sworn affidavit. I'm not quite sure where her testimony was, where she described some really horrific things and experiences with both Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Have you ever spoken with Katie? And I'm just curious, is she just kind of gone radio silent?
I don't want to get into kind of sourcing and that's very obviously very delicate and something that I take really seriously. But I think what I would tell you is that there are a wide range of victims out there that experienced had very horrific experiences, and many of them have not come forward publicly. And so what we do have in the records of SDNY, of the Florida Attorney General, of other investigations, FBI, Interpol investigations that have gone into Jeffrey Epstein, there is a really clear pattern and practice that cuts across, potential over 1,000 women who had really, really horrific experiences. And I think one thing to remember is not everyone, sometimes the most salacious headlines involved in this story rise to the top. And Virginia's is one of those that was really at the center of the sex trafficking operation and therefore experienced some truly horrific, and she's testified to this. But there's lots of women who, would were maybe not trafficked, but were abused. And so there's just varying levels of criminality. And in part, that's why this sex trafficking operation, this criminal enterprise, was able to exist essentially in plain sight for so long, because there were kind of varying levels of criminality. So if anyone were looking, it may not be immediately obvious what was going on.
And as far as I don't know if you feel comfortable, but I feel like I can ask you and you don't have to answer. With many of these victim stories, has Donald Trump been implicated and that you know of?
So I interviewed a woman named Stacey Williams, who alleged that she and we did all the kind of background investigations, spoke to I believe over a dozen of her peers that she confided with contemporaneously at the time, as well as some physical evidence. But we reported at NBC that Stacey Williams was kind of in a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and was introduced to Donald Trump at some point. And in that first meeting, she alleges that Donald Trump uh, sexually harassed her, touched her inappropriately. And she perceived that as some kind of bet, possibly, between the two men. That, I think, is one of the strongest uh, cases that I have looked into and that I have fully reported out. I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And in part, this is Donald Trump's and Epstein when he was alive. There's been a lot of uncertainty about exactly how close this relationship was and exactly what the nature of their friendship at different moments was. But I think there is no doubt that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were good friends. They socialized regularly. Trump has said on the record and acknowledged many times that he was aware that there were very young women around Jeffrey Epstein. So, I think in terms of implication of actual criminality, no, we have not yet, or I have not yet in the course of my reporting reported that. However, we know that it was a close relationship, and I think there are really legitimately outstanding questions that, interestingly, the President of the United States has not answered in a really definitive way, and twice has had the full power of the Justice Department there to do investigations or to make definitive statements, and we haven't seen that either. So, it is a very curious and important part of this story. And I think a lot of victims that I spoke to said that, and this was a common practice, but I think Trump was a very clear example, which was that Epstein would boast about his friendship with Donald Trump. That is part of how he, one, kept the circle of people that gave him the kind of social cover that enabled him to continue to operate, even when the circumstances should have been alarming to anyone who was paying attention. But two, he cultivated relationships and would boast of relationships as a means to kind of insulate himself from criticism. And so I think
Also attract more people, I would think, to his circle because
potentially, yes. And I think,
name drop, basically.
named 100%. And that was a very important part of the strategy. And it did a couple things, because it's like, oh, if this famous person is here, then this can't be bad.
Mm-hmm.
Or if this famous person is here, then everything must be okay. Or I'm not going to ask any questions. And that was a very deliberate tactic. And my reporting reflects that was a common thing that was discussed kind of within the circle of alleged co-conspirators.
Claire Silverman, who's joining us, wanted to know about Michael Wolff's credibility, and she's mentioned that he's been saying a lot lately. I don't know if you feel comfortable weighing in on Michael Wolff's credibility, but have you heard some of the claims that he's making?
Absolutely. And I think some of the claims he's making are things that journalists like myself and others have been chasing for a very long time. I wouldn't want to, if you don't know anyone else's, as you know, Katie, you don't know anyone else's reporting until you're inside it.
Right. You don't want to impugn his character necessarily. I wanted to ask you what your sources are telling you, or if you have good sources inside the White House, because I know you've been mostly investigating the Jeffrey Epstein of it all and talking to a lot of the victims. But how freaked out are they inside the White House about this, because I wanted to mention that CNN is reporting that J.D. Vance is apparently scheduled to host Pam Bondi, Assist Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles and other top officials to his residence to discuss the handling of the Epstein case and other pressing matters. But they're now reporting that it's in flux after news of the dinner leaked. A spokesman for Vance said the dinner, first reported by CNN, had not been planned. So I guess who knows if this is true. But what are you hearing about this potential meeting, I guess?
Look, I would say that my sources inside the White House and close to the White House have a high degree of alarm and fear about the oxygen, the optics, and the fact that and I think this meeting and the cancellation of the meeting and whether or not it's in flux speaks to the level of chaos around this, that there is not a clear plan. There has not been a consistent message. And any attempts to contain this scandal or move on from it have been not only unsuccessful, but have escalated. And so I think that there is, this is to those around the president, this is a really concerning, they want to stay as far away from this as possible. And I think the other thing you have to remember about leaks from the White House is that for news organizations to report something, there's a lot of due diligence and a lot that goes into that. And so news of something making it to the point of being published by the mainstream media reflects a high degree of confidence in sourcing. So I would, and my own reporting reflects that. So I just think the fact that this is chaotic is in part of the story, because you have, I think, a president and a kind of many of his supporters that have not always been in alignment about exactly what the next steps are. And that is proving to be problematic.
I wanted to ask you about Ghislaine Maxwell. As you know, she's been moved to a minimum security prison in Texas, where the majority of inmates are serving time for nonviolent offenses and white-collar crimes. It was described as a country club in a Washington Post piece. What do you know about her new accommodations, and why she was transferred there, and really the whole thing with the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche going there and spending time with her and interviewing her for 9 hours? And what is the end game? And perhaps you can only speculate on this at this point.
So I think I have informed speculation is what I would say, which is that this is a development. Ghislaine Maxwell has been in prison. She has been going through the appeals process. And very suddenly, within the last few weeks, we have seen, she could have been moved at any point, but she's only been moved after a really, truly unprecedented meeting between the leadership of the Justice Department and someone who has been convicted and has an appeal pending before the Supreme Court. It is unprecedented, and it's just bizarre. And I think what we know about it is that there was this meeting. We know that at least some parts of it have been recorded. So hopefully the public will at some point learn about what was discussed between Ghislaine Maxwell.
Is considering publicly releasing the transcript of those conversations, right, which I was surprised to hear.
Yes. And I think we should be skeptical of that, because anything could be, this information, one, could involve, secret grand jury information. Two, could involve victims' names. Like, there's a whole range of reasons why I think any source that I've spoken to inside the Justice Department or out, find it highly unlikely that will come to pass. But again, we're in very strange times in which normal procedures are not being followed. I think the reason that this is so significant is because the appearance, again, we don't know, but the appearance, given the complete vacuum of information, is that Ghislaine Maxwell was suddenly moved to a low security prison, which she, by nature of being a sex offender herself, remember, part of her charges were the fact that she participated in the sexual abuse of minors. That's critical. When you have that type of conviction, there's all sorts of precautions and things that should be happening. The fact that she was suddenly moved with no explanation to a place that, real housewives who have been convicted on, kind of financial charges that have nothing to do with actual physical harm to children. I think that just speaks to the fact that it has the appearance, and I would say my sources inside and outside of the Justice Department are alarmed that it has the appearance of perhaps this was a reward in some way, that she provided information to the Trump Justice Department, and within days was moved. And that can be seen as an accommodation. And I think the important thing to remember here is at any point, the Bureau of Prisons, the Department of Justice, the White House could issue a statement and say, this is why she was moved. There could be a reasonable explanation, I suppose. The most likely one would be like if there was a credible threat on her life that she needed to move prisons. But even so, it doesn't match with the fact pattern. And I think this speaks to why the Epstein story is such a subject of fascination and why it's such an important kind of his moment in the history of our judicial system, is because the reason that this story is so outrageous is because there was the appearance of a different system of justice, that the laws only applied to certain people in certain ways. And if you were wealthy or if you had influence, it did not apply. And that is the accusation for Maxwell, for Epstein, and for a host of others. And so the fact that things are being done in secret without information is only fueling that perception. And it is really unfortunate because for all the victims that are out there or others who were involved in this case or just in other cases generally, their faith in the justice system, which is what our entire democracy in some ways is dependent on, they don't believe that it's fair under the law. And that has really, really problematic implications, not just for this case, but for thousands of other cases.
I'm going to wrap this up in 2 seconds, Sarah, but I know that you told my team earlier that there are now some changes in the way the Department of Justice interacts with victims. Can you explain what that means?
Absolutely. So there were a lot of things that went very wrong in how Jeffrey Epstein interacted with the Justice Department and how those cases were done. But one kind of silver lining, and it was very important to Virginia before she died, as well as a lot of other victims, was the fact that the way that the Justice Department interacts with victims and how they keep them informed was really problematic. And so as a result, in the last few years, there have been changes in federal legislation. There have been changes in the law in Florida. There have been new policies and procedures at the Department of Justice, which are all designed to keep victims fully informed of any developments in their case, whether there are new investigative avenues, whether documents are going to be released. This week, we saw for the first time, one of the things that was interesting to me is that we have been hearing about this release the files, but all of the victims had not been notified, which meant you can't release any files. And so but just this week, I heard from several sources that did receive notifications from the Department of Justice informing them that the department had petitioned the court to release some of this information. That is a sign that there may be, they are at least following the steps that are required in order to do something like that. And I think
that somehow they were stopped from following through, right?
No. I just mean that, so right now, for example, a judge is waiting to determine if grand jury information, which has been under seal, could be released to the public. Generally, it's not.
Right.
And so victims this week were informed that there is the possibility that this might happen. And because their name or their identifying information may be in that. And that's it's an important step, which shows they are following the policy and procedure, which is an excellent development. But secondly, it also shows that this is not just talk, potentially, that there really is some effort to prepare for the release of this information. And that has a lot of people across DOJ and, across anyone who has a connection to this case really alarmed.
Interesting. Well, I'd love to have you back. Maybe we could do something on my podcast about Virginia because I think her story is worth telling. And she was incredibly courageous. And I was so heartbroken when I saw that she took her own life last April. And so let's talk about doing that in the future. I'm moving on to the mRNA vaccine,
Oh,
the
good.
case of mRNA vaccine development funding. So we've got an epidemiologist waiting in the wings. But Sarah, I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this.
Katie, I so appreciate your interest. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Talk to you soon, I hope. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, now we've got our final guest, you all. I hope you I hope this is helpful, everyone. And please ask questions. That's why I like Substack because I want you all to be a part of the conversation. So please feel free if you have any questions. So now we're moving on to public health. This is going to be our last interview. You guys have other things that you need to do, but you probably heard that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has announced the cancellation of nearly $500 million in federal funding for mRNA vaccine development, including dozens of projects designed to help us respond quickly to biological threats that could happen in the future, like bird flu, new COVID variants, or even potential outbreaks of diseases like Ebola or Zika. And so we've invited Dr. Caitlin Jetelina, your local epidemiologist here on Substack. Why can't I say Substack, you guys? And she is a data scientist and a consultant to organizations like the CDC. She's going to tell us what's at stake and what you need to know about the future rollout of vaccines. So hopefully, it says waiting for your local epidemiologist, team KCM. Did I do anything wrong here? Or is this happening? Is Caitlin on the way? Is it my Wi Fi again? What's going on? Hi, everyone. See, this is what you used to see you never saw during commercial breaks at the Today Show or the CBS Evening News when I was saying to producers, like, what the hell is going on? Um, let's see. I hope it's not. She is on standby. Okay. Um, I'm not going to cancel because it says waiting for your local epidemiologist. Should I invite her again, Julia? Gosh, everything was going so smoothly, you guys. And now let's just see. I did your local epidemiologist, but let me just invite her again in case there was maybe it timed out, perhaps. Here she is. I got it. She's putting in very big letters, your local epidemiologist. It keeps going cancel. So let me try it again. Your local, and it says, she said she didn't get it. Okay, let me try again. Maybe I did the wrong. It says your local epidemiologist and it has a purple check. Let me try it one more time with this. Try resending whatever you do. Don't end the live. I'm not going to end the live. Don't worry. I learned my lesson there. Okay. I'm just going to double check you guys that I'm inviting the right person. But it does say your local epidemiologist, and then it says at team YLE. Is that right, Julia? It says team YLE. I'm just going to go one more time. Are you guys enjoying this? Isn't this fun? Yes, hold on. I'm doing it one more time. Your local ep. Oh, it's under Caitlin. Oh, I typed your name. Okay, that was different. All right, let's try this again. Please, God, make. Okay, Caitlin. She's here. I'm so sorry, Caitlin. I I was
Made it.
I was hearing your local epidemiologist, and instead of your name, did I screw up?
No, I'm here. We made it.
I
I'm not
know.
sure what happened.
Anyway, I don't know what happened either, but thank you for doing this. What the hell is going on with this RFK canceling MNRA funding, $500 million? Can you
Can you
explain?
believe that?
Yeah. Can you tell us what your reaction was when you heard this?
But my reaction, I guess I was surprised, but I mean, this is just a long pattern in what we've been seeing, right? So, for anyone watching, he canceled $500 million of mRNA vaccine research. This ends up being about 22 projects that were active, like literally active clinical trials that are just getting stopped. And basically, his justification was that mRNA poses more risks than benefits, which is just simply not backed by science, right? mRNA technology saved, I think it's 3 million lives during the height of the pandemic in the United States and 18 million hospitalizations. And so it's just incredibly short sighted, right? It's because what we are building on are the building blocks for other vaccines for the next pandemic, because there will be another pandemic like bird flu, for example. The other thing is why I think it's short sighted is that we've seen this war on mRNA vaccines really unfold these past few weeks. Um, but what I don't want to also happen is that we're also looking for mRNA vaccines that protect against cancer that are working really well and allergies. And it's really unlocked this massive scientific discovery. And I don't want us to be moving backwards. And it seems like that's the direction we're going.
Well, I mean, mRNA, all kinds of mRNA vaccines show incredible scientific promise, but he claims that the vaccines, quote, don't perform well against viruses that infect the upper respiratory tract. But the data doesn't show that at all, does it?
Yeah, I mean, so one criticism is that mRNA, yeah, it doesn't prevent infections altogether. And I mean, he's kind of right, right? Only about 20 to 30% of infections are prevented through vaccines. And yes, that sucks. It's not ideal. But that's not a failure of mRNA vaccines, because no vaccine prevents infection from these very fast moving respiratory viruses. So, I don't think that's a default or a problem or a challenge of mRNA. That's just how viruses mutate. And it's just the reality of biology at this point.
And it's also throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not perfect, but it does so much good. And in fact, I know that the health department said in its release that the cancellations or the lack of funding will affect 22 projects managed by the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or something called BARDA, which you know all about. BARDA's mission is to respond quickly to biological emergencies. So how screwed are we going to be if something happens? I mean, let's just be, just very direct about this. How screwed are we going to be if we have another pandemic, or if we have something like the bird flu, or like even a huge flu outbreak without these vaccines? Can you put it into perspective for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very concerned, right? Because mRNA, the magic behind it is it's the most adaptable vaccine platform we have. It's very fast to develop. It's easy to update. Remember, we kept getting different variants with COVID that we could just update the vaccine within 90 days. And it's incredibly scalable for global use. If we take, for example, the old biotechnology platform for flu vaccines like H5N1, for example, those vaccines are made within eggs. And because bird flu impacts chickens, then we're going to have a really hard time making flu vaccines because we need the chicken eggs. And so it's, like I said, very short sighted. And we need to think about the long run, right? All about science is prevention and preparedness for the future. And we just got out of a pandemic. Like, let's not do this again. Let's learn from our mistakes.
But also building blocks, right?
Building
Science
blocks.
work with
Yes.
building blocks with progress and then refinement and more progress and then more discoveries and like to totally just dismantle the whole thing. I mean, what impact $500 million will that have on research? Is that going to mean it can't happen at all? Will there be some mRNA research that will still be done?
It's a really good question, and there's not too much clarity on what this means. It sounds like it's just for respiratory viruses. So I think cancer and allergies, those clinical trials should be protected. So we're really focused on pandemic preparedness right now, trying to get us better vaccines. And if another pandemic comes, like bird flu, we're going to have to start over these clinical trials. Like it's that simple. It's just going to take time, and usually time is not something we have. One way we got to be so fast during COVID-19 was because global cooperation, but also, like you just mentioned, we were building mRNA vaccines since the 1960s, right? It was built on so much knowledge that when the emergency was there, we could act really fast. And we
Right.
did, and it saved a lot of lives. And so I do feel like this is a huge missed opportunity. I think we're going to regret it. And we really better hope we don't get a pandemic anytime soon.
Well, I wanted to ask you, one of the key threats mRNA technology was meant to address is bird flu. HSS revoked a nearly $600 million contract to Moderna, the drug maker, to develop a vaccine that would target avian influenza. Earlier this year, we heard a lot about bird flu, right? And now it seems to have fallen out of because nobody is really right
Uh-oh, are you
now.
there?
Oh, no. Yeah, can you hear me?
I'm here. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Did you hear?
Yes, I did. So bird flu's been around for about 20 years, right? But what's making us epidemiologists nervous is how it's changing. It didn't do much for a long time. It was spreading among migratory birds. But then all of a sudden in 2022, hit poultry farms really hard. Millions and millions of chickens had to die because bird flu all of a sudden found that pathway. Then fast forward to 2024, where it started infecting cows, which was very weird. We've never seen cow-to-cow transmission of bird flu. And so to us epidemiologists, it makes us really nervous because flu is very unpredictable. It's now in all these different types of animals. And when it's in animals and then also infecting humans because we're so closely in proximity to cows, then that virus can keep changing and keep adapting to us. But you're right. It seems that right now we're back in a lull and we don't really know why, right? Is it because it's migration? Is it because it's seasonality? Has it run out of cows to infect? Is it going to be coming back this fall? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions, but us epidemiologists, when we talk about bird flu, we always keep one eye open because it has the potential for another pandemic.
In fact, some experts believe that we could be just one mutation away from sustained human transmission.
Transmission.
Yeah.
That is right. And I mean, viruses change pretty randomly. And so all it takes is that virus to jump from one person to one person and make that exact mutation that's needed, and it starts. I do want to preface, though, is because I know not all of us need like more stress in our lives today. I think that this is all concerning, but really the risk of a pandemic is pretty low. It's about 5% every year. And so while us epidemiologists are taking a very close look at this, and yes, it's incredibly good news that transmission had decreased, for the general public, this is really not something to worry about right now, given, I would say, everything else in the state of the world.
Yeah, but I think it also just is yet another example of the disrespect that has been shown to scientists and medical researchers and all kinds of people who are trying to improve public health. that this kind of reason it shows a basic lack of knowledge of science. And as RFK Jr. said, hey, I wouldn't take medical advice from me. You just wonder who's advising him and why they're doing this at it seems very short-sighted, I guess I should say. I wanted to ask you real quickly about the vaccine rollout because is there anything that people should know? It's August, the fall's coming, it's just around the corner. People will be wanting to get flu vaccines. COVID hasn't gone away. I've talked to a number of people who have had COVID this summer, even. And is there any advice you would give people in terms of vaccine schedules and things like that as we approach the fall?
Yeah, I think what's really clear right now is that flu and RSV vaccines for this fall should be about business as usual. I would definitely expect to get your flu vaccine probably, closer to Halloween. Those that are infants or pregnant women should get an RSV vaccine here in the next month. I think those are pretty under control. The biggest questions we have right now is around COVID-19. Who is eligible? When will it be available? Where will it be available? And unfortunately, at this time, we don't have answers to those questions. And typically we would, which makes me very concerned about what is the process that's happening and what is going to be the access for people in about a month. You're right. We are in a summer COVID wave right now. It seems it's not at, incredible heights, but it is there. People are getting sick, and we do expect COVID to uptick again this winter.
Okay, someone's saying, do you recommend getting what is a titer?
That is a blood test. So a titer is like a blood
I've
test.
never heard of that.
Yeah, to check your antibody levels. And, titers, I would say no, because titers only measure one part of your immune system, not the entire part of the immune system. And so while it'll tell you if your antibodies are high, it doesn't tell you if like your T cells are high, which is another part, a defense mechanism. So I wouldn't look at titers. I would just plan on getting your COVID, flu, and RSV if you're eligible this fall as scheduled.
And some say, what is the current number of COVID deaths in the U.S.?
So this changes with time, but right now we're seeing about 150 deaths per week. Which is, one of the lowest we've had since the start of the pandemic. If we remember at the height of the pandemic, it was about 3,500 a day. So we've gotten a lot of progress, but that doesn't mean that we're not losing lives still. It's still a virus. It's still a threat, especially to those over 65.
And before we go, Caitlin, I thought it was interesting that you said this year could be a test run for restricting other routine vaccines like HPV and measles. It's ironic that RFK Jr. has vowed to make America healthy again. How would you assess the progress of the mission, and are you concerned that this is going to have a ripple effect? All this, all these policy changes on other vaccines that are really shown to be helpful and useful for people, obviously, like the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. And we've seen this uptick in measles. I mean, how concerned are you about all of this?
I'm very concerned. I am very concerned of what's going to happen in the future of our routine vaccinations beyond flu, beyond COVID. We know that they're going to start looking into the Hep B vaccine, the HPV vaccine, the one of the measles vaccines. And given kind of the mess that we've seen with COVID these past few months around the vaccine process, um, there's potential to do a lot of damage. And it's really hard for me to understand how we are making America healthy again while we're not preventing these diseases through vaccines. Prevention is the key to making and leading healthy lives. And at the core of that is access to vaccines for whoever wants to have it. And so we will see. I think a lot's going to unfold these next couple months, and we'll have a much clearer picture on how RFK is going to be playing his cards, as well as if and when Congress is ever going to step up.
Yeah. Well, your point of view is so important. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for educating the public and for staying on top of these issues as well as you. I mean, it must be hard to keep up with everything, but thank God this is your job. And well, into being an epidemiologist and off of Substack. But Dr. Caitlin Jetelina, thank you. And if you all have any questions for Caitlin, maybe we can send them to her and maybe you'll answer them and we can feature them in our newsletter, which is Wake Up Call. So hopefully you guys sign up for Wake Up Call by going to katiecouric.com. Sign up to my Substack if you want to be a paid subscriber. It helps support our whole team, and I couldn't do it without them. And I was going to say, do you want to say hi to my grandson, Jay? But I don't think he's outside my door anymore. But at one point, I want to show you guys how cute he is.
It's adorable. Well, thanks for having me, Katie.
Yeah, so great to see you, Caitlin. Thank you. And everyone,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. I know these are long. I hope they're useful and helpful. And, you know, if there are people you want me to talk to, please let me know in the comments. I want this to be a really interactive experience for all of us. And I am doing this for you. I enjoy learning at the same time, but I really want to help provide you with fact-based and comprehensible and action-oriented. I don't know what I'm talking about, y'all. I'm tired. It's been an hour and a half, and it's 6:30. So I'm going to say good night, and we'll see you next Wednesday. We're doing this every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And again, I'd love to hear what you all think and how I can be more helpful to you. So that's it. And thank you to all my teammates at KCM, Courtney, Julia, Adriana, Julia, C. Am I forgetting anyone? I need a drink, you guys, although drinking is not good for you and can help increase your risk of cancer. I just wanted to add that. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.